Remember, after the end of the school year last year, third graders, there were a lot of parents across the state of Tennessee in a panic that their third graders would be held back because of reading comprehension, TCAP scores, and proficiency levels not up to state standards. Well, there may be an issue once again at the end of this coming school year because it's now, those third graders are now fourth graders, and again, there is a reading comprehension test that they have to pass. Let's talk about this issue and much, much more with Laura Testino with Chalkbeat Tennessee. Chalkbeat Tennessee is a nonprofit. They focus on education all across the state of Tennessee. Laura, good morning to you. Am I saying that right? What am I missing in your article? Good morning.
Yeah, hey, good morning, Andrew. Thank you for having me. Yes, so there is going to be, not only for the third graders again this year who are new to third grade, new to this law across the state, there's still some of this aspects of this law that will impact fourth graders. And so just to kind of remind everyone what this law is, it was passed in 2021 by the legislature. We're at this point, right, kind of still maybe in the throes, maybe on the way out of the pandemic at this point. But the idea was, right, we're going to have learning loss from students who, have not had the most consistent education experience throughout the pandemic. And we really want to focus on early literacy, which tons of education research shows is linked to several good outcomes for students. And so that's kind of what lawmakers wanted to achieve with this. And like other states implemented this retention measure that they said, okay, if we're not seeing success in early literacy by third grade, we're going to suggest that these students be held back so that they can get to proficiency. But the way that this law is set up, there's lots of different pathways to essentially getting supports. And so what ended up happening at the end of last year, well, we had 60% of students across the state of Tennessee, so that's something like 43,000 students, ended up not making that proficiency mark on the TCAP test that they take every year, which for many third graders, it's the first time they take a standardized test like this. There were several exemptions and support measures built into the law such that only 1% or less than 1,000 students across the state of Tennessee were ultimately retained. But by fourth grade, the law basically says we want to know for sure that these support measures have worked. And so there's this measure that the law calls for that's called adequate growth. And the state school board just approved last Friday what that measure will look like. It will actually apply to about 12% of students in the fourth, or who were third graders last year, fourth graders this year, who've been doing things like tutoring or went to summer school. And this measure basically says we want to see if you're not reaching proficiency on this test, we want to see that you're reaching a very specific measure of growth and that you're making progress towards being proficient on this test. I can talk a little bit more about that, but that's sort of what we're going to start seeing here as testing ramps up for the spring.
Okay, Laura, I follow you so far. And just so our audience knows, last year when there seemed to be a panic among parents of third graders, there were, I think, around 60% or so that were in danger of not moving on to the fourth grade. But in actuality, it was it like less than 15% that were held back, or even less than that, right?
That's right. Yes, I can go through that just one more time. But 60%, I know I saw I froze a little bit, and so I hope the audience can catch this. 60% were at risk for being held back just based off of their test score alone. But again, this law, while it has the retention component of it, is also really focused on getting students supports for reading so that they can progress. And so essentially only 1% of students were held back in third grade across the board. But what we're seeing now that we're talking about with this new measure that is going to happen in fourth grade is essentially the story wasn't over at the end of third grade for these students. They were going to summer school, they were going to tutoring, and so now about 1 in 4 of the students who initially tested at risk are going to have to pass another measure to avoid being retained in the fourth grade. And while we've talked about now a lot of the different pathways that third graders can have to, even if I'm not making the grade on the test, I can go to all of these supports in the fourth grade, or I am exempt for certain reasons. There's not as many pathways once you're in the fourth grade and you are really required to make this adequate growth measure or test proficient on the test. There's not as many pathways to get to fifth grade with the same type of supports. And ultimately, it just would kind of end in retention for these students and not being able to go to fifth grade.
So, Laura, I feel like it's going to be history repeating itself. I mean, here we go again, same type of situation where they have to pass a certain standard or else. I mean, do you see that happening once again in your best educated decision?
For fourth grade, it will be that smaller subset of students from third grade. Third grade, of course, will kind of be the same story as last year, and depending on the parent and the school's familiarity with the law, you could see different outcomes of how surprised people might be at the initial set of test scores or not. But the interesting thing that came out of the Tennessee State School Board meeting on Friday, where they passed this provision that essentially came up with a formula that said, individualized to each student, here's how much we want to see you grow toward proficiency if you're not quite there yet, is the board took an interesting stance and said, hey, the law actually allows us in the same breath to apply all of these rules and policies for laws. It also says that we can serve as an advisory to the legislature. And so a resolution was floated by one of the board members there that would essentially say that the state board could come up with some proposed changes to this law. This state board, includes education administrators, even a previous fourth grade teacher, that would maybe put more of these supports in earlier grade levels and take a different look at these retention pathways in ways to the next grade. So the board meets again on March 4th, where they may see those resolutions. And there's certainly, in addition to this board, pushback from other educators, some school board members in different districts to really reconsider pieces of this law. Of course, the legislature's in session now, so it is possible that there could be changes, but of course, whether to be seen up to be seen whether those could really take effect for this year's third or fourth graders, or if it would again only impact future third and fourth graders.
Yeah, we're almost into March right now, just about a week or so away, and here we go again. Anything else? We have thousands of people that watch us here on the Digital Desk, Laura. You know that. Anything else we want to mention before we let you go with regards to this story?
Sure. Story and other reporting is, of course, on chalkbeat.org. But just for parents out there, I would just say, really make sure that you're in touch with your student's teacher. Even in first and second grade, there's some just kind of testing benchmark points to understand whether this law might eventually apply to your child in third and fourth grade. And for those in third and fourth grade, just really keeping in touch with the teacher, really kind of paying attention to when this TCAP test is going to be, and making sure you sort of understand the outcomes, and that if you're not proficient on that third grade test, that doesn't mean immediate retention, but just understanding, depending on which pathways you take, there could still be this outcome in fourth grade where, if you're taking a certain pathway, there's still another test. And so just, being sure that you're involved with your students' education is the best way kind of to understand how this might impact you.
Laura Testino, always giving us a deep dive into so many education stories across the state and certainly affecting so many of us here in Memphis and the Mid-South. Thank you very much for your reporting. Chalkbeat Tennessee, certainly a great nonprofit that covers education across the state. Laura, thank you.
Thank you.